My name is Stacey Sottile. I'm the author of Guess Who, Mama Pooh. Guess Who, Mama Pooh is a children's book about a little girl living with sickle cell disease and is loosely based on my life. Writing Guess Who, Mama Pooh is just one of the ways I use my voice to teach and educate people about sickle cell disease. I was diagnosed at 11 months old. Sickle cell disease is a red blood cell disorder. Instead of the blood cells staying round and in shape, they turn rigid and sticky, which makes them hard to flow through the body. They get stuck in your veins and arteries, and that causes the intense pain for patients. Thankfully, there are many new discoveries and treatments, and patients are living longer than ever before. For me, my parents were told that I wouldn't make it to see my teenage years. But here I am, 53 years old and a mom of two, wearing my sickle cell warrior cap each and every day. Life with this disease can be challenging. That is why I am so grateful to launch The Advocate, the power of your voice. This program is dedicated to sickle cell and advocacy, and is set to teach patients and caregivers on how they can use their voice to advocate for sickle cell disease. Join me as I welcome my first guest to our premiere episode of The Advocate, the power of your voice, Mr. Fatiyn Muhammad. Fatiyn, affectionately known as Brother Fatiyn, has long used his voice to advocate for others. He became a dedicated voice for his late wife, Sharon Hanifa Simmons, who tragically lost her battle with sickle cell disease. Even after her passing, Fatiyn has vowed to remain dedicated to this cause, continuing his mission to raise awareness for those fighting for sickle cell disease. Personally, I know Brother Fatiyn for over a decade, and I had the privilege of knowing his lovely wife, Sharon. I can say without a doubt that Fatiyn is dedicated and deeply passionate to raise awareness. He even stepped in on my behalf to advocate for me in the past when I needed it. So Fatiyn, thank you for joining us to discuss this very important issue. As many of you may know, Fatiyn wears many hats. As a Emmy Award winning radio producer for 107.5 FM WBLS radio on iHeartRadio, as the producer for two of Reverend Al Sharpton's radio programs, Al Sharpton being one of the biggest known advocates around the world. With that being said, you can tell that Fatiyn's voice speaks volumes on many different platforms. So Fatiyn, let's jump into it, get to these questions I have for you, and discuss the issue. Thank you again for joining us. The first question I want to know, and I'm sure the people would like to know, is how did you begin how did you begin working with Reverend Al Sharpton?
Thank you for inviting me. And before I answer your first question of, working with Reverend Sharpton, let me just make one slight correction because I have to. It's important.
Sure.
That I produced two nationally syndicated radio shows for Reverend Al Sharpton. One is called Keeping It Real with Reverend Al Sharpton. That is done by Reach Media, Urban One, which is the same company as TV One. And the reason why it's so important because I've never worked for iHeart, and Reach Media and the Reverend Sharpton, that is one of the only Black own radio conglomerates that are pretty much left today.
Oh,
That's number
wow.
one.
Very important and awesome. And my
Yeah.
apologies for that.
No problem. Then number
Sure.
two, the BLS side, that's Media Co. At one time, WBLS was owned by Inner City. It was black owned in New York. I started when I met you. I was working for 98.7 Kiss FM at that particular time, which was a MS broadcasting at the particular time. So Kiss was never black owned, but WBLS was black owned. It's no longer black owned. So you can look at pretty much the radio stations that are pretty much black owned. Now, to answer your question,
Awesome.
how did I get to work with Reverend Al Sharpton? So,
Yes. And how long have you been working with Reverend?
oh, I've been working with Reverend Sharpton over 35 years, and now by producing this radio show, like I said, we work for a company, so I don't work for him anymore. We work together, and it goes back to my slight activism as I grew up, and started to see the 60s on television. I remember watching something called Eye on the Prize on PBS, and watching that, and then started to question my mother and said, well, I questioned myself. If I would have been in the 60s, what would I have done when I saw dogs and water holes placed on people? Then I asked myself, what if you was in Jesus' time? What would you have done? And every time that I placed myself in some adversity that we as people of color was catching hell, I said I would be active. So there was a story about a young lady named Tawana Brawley, upstate New York, about her being raped. And I happened to be visiting a friend in Boston when I saw it come on the news and said that there was going to be a big rally in Brooklyn. So I was going to be back in Brooklyn because I was born and raised, and I lived in Brooklyn at that time. So I went to a place called Slave Theater. It was an organization called the United African Movement, led by attorneys Alton Maddox, the late Alton Maddox, and C. Vernon Mason, and Reverend Al Sharpton. So I went there to just attend a rally, just to find out a little bit more about the young lady, Tawana Brawley. I did. The head of security saw me, and he said I looked like someone. I didn't know him. His name was Paul James. He also has passed. But that night, when he was head of Reverend Sharpton's security detail at the time, so he asked me to travel with them to Junior's. After Junior's, those that are familiar with Brooklyn, Junior's is the famous restaurant down on the Calvin Flatbush Avenue.
Yes.
And yeah, so my thing is, that's how I got involved with Reverend Sharpton. I volunteered my time. A lot of people volunteered their time. I had a data center job, so I worked 12 hours, 3 days a week. So I had a lot of time that I can volunteer. So that's how I began with Reverend Al Sharpton, in the sense of my activism for us as a people, fighting and standing up.
Oh, wow. What a journey and information that, I wasn't aware of even after knowing you for so many years. And it's a question I wanted to ask, like behind the scenes, and I'm sure, we're here to talk about health advocacy, and we'll get into that. But just a part of your career as working in a forum to advocate for social change and the things that you speak about on your radio show. You have a platform where you speak about very important and complex issues like social and political justice, and just for your description, would you consider yourself or call yourself a social activist?
Yes, I would call myself a social activist, but because that's one of the hats I wear. But one of the other things, especially on my radio show, I discuss everything: relationships, sports. I think that, and one of the things that I learned from my mentor, Bob Slade, who was at 98.7 Kiss FM, created the shows Open Line, which I'm host now, and that I produced back then, is that when it came to black folks, black men, especially black men, to speak about issues, we talked about crime. These platforms would come and get us when it's about crime, about sports. But we could talk about a lot of things, and he wanted to create that platform. So yes, as a activist or advocate, yes, I would say I'm a social justice advocate or activist at the end of the day. But I wear so many hats, from being a parent, being now a widow, but a husband. I just wear many hats, and I learned that whatever you do in life, do it at the best. So when I used to speak at Career Day in my daughter's elementary school, the Duke Ellington PS 140 out there in Jamaica, Queens, when I spoke to the children, I said, you never know. You may want to have a desire to journey out into one field, but as life goes on, you may take a turn, may take a twist. And I said, whatever you do, make sure that you do it at the best that you can. So I wear a lot of hats, but yes, one of those is a social justice activist.
Social justice advocate. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes, and so many important hats you wear. And, that's when we decided to do this program. You were one of the first people that popped in my mind. Of course, we worked together many times before, but when you think of advocate, and today we're here to discuss mostly your role as a caregiver advocate for Sharon. As I said, Sharon lost her battle with sickle cell disease, and I just want to know, was it through some of the work that you previously done with Reverend Al Sharpton and your role as a social advocate, was that one of the things that gave you the knowledge and the confidence to step into the role to speak up for Sharon when she was sick and in need of someone to advocate?
It basically gave me the backing. I already had the backbone. And knowledge is something I didn't know anything about sickle cell. Let me just also update folks. Sharon is her birth name. I call her Hanifa. Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna refer to her as Hanifa, but Sharon is her birth name. And it gave me the backing when I needed to pull clout, because you got to realize that sickle cell, and as you deal with living with sickle cell disease, is that it's hard to advocate for yourself when you're in sickle cell crisis. That's number one. And then number two, you need to be knowledgeable, because when you're talking to doctors tend to look at it like you don't know anything. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know anything when I met Hanifa. I didn't know anything about sickle cell. She told me about it. I also remember seeing her first crisis, which wasn't a very severe crisis. I think it was something like she went in and got a treatment and came home. But as time went on, those crises sometimes got harder. But being with Reverend Sharpton, it just gave me the understand and the wherewithal that you stand up for what you believe in, and you stand up for what is right. And that's what I got by working with Reverend Sharpton and other political and social activists, not only in the city of New York, but across the country.
Awesome. Yes, very important. But do you think that anyone is able to step into a role as a caregiver advocate, or, for a loved one living with sickle cell disease? Or do you think that it requires someone with your sort of background, as from the work that you've done in the past, to advocate?
I think everyone can, but everyone can't. And what I mean is that if you have, everybody doesn't have the gumption to do that. Hanifa's boyfriend before me, he said to me one time that he really didn't go visit her. And Hanifa looked at it that he wasn't supportive. Now, I can't get into their relationship, but the point I'm making is that he said that he didn't like hospitals. And everyone cannot be a caregiver. It takes patience, it takes time, and especially a loved one that is laying up there sick. So everyone, you have to know yourself. I didn't know myself. My father got sick, and, I had a supporting cast. I had aunts. And unfortunately, my mother was sickly at that time, because when my father passed on a Sunday, my mother had just got out of one hospital, Kings County, on a Friday. My father passed on a Sunday in St. Mary's Hospital. I not only worked at Billboard magazine, which is my full-time, and the #1 music magazine, but I also had to carry my father's super job, which was three apartment buildings and 5 stores. at the age of
Oh.
22. At the age of 22. But I had a supporting cast. When I met Hanifa and got into that, it became a different story. Her parents had left to go south. Her sister was down south. So they entrusted me there. So I needed to become more knowledgeable on sickle cell so I know what I'm dealing with and what I'm talking about. And as time went on, I started studying different things. Hanifa had a problem. She didn't have a problem getting pregnant, but she had a problem going to term. That's another story and another conversation, how we found out and how we had children successfully. And that was a combination of working with a doctor, and we both came up with a similar idea at the same time, which worked for us to be blessed with two healthy daughters that only have the trait. But you have to know yourself, and you can't feel bad. Sometimes you do fall in love with somebody, but you know you got to understand what it takes, because you will do them a disservice if you can't do what is necessary for them to get through whatever kind of health challenge that they're going. I don't want to say obstacle, because people have challenges in life. And I look at some folks are just born with health challenges that they can't help. And those are the things in life. It's not something that, everybody can do. But everybody, if they have the will to, they can do it.
Interesting points you made, and just want to say congratulations on your beautiful daughters. I know they're grown, and I always brag on them as like a auntie from the sidelines, because I just think they're such beautiful and talented and intelligent young women. But with that being said, to answer you of that question, then I would like to ask you, what advice would you have for someone, that has a loved one with sickle cell that may not be vocal, they may be a little shy or quiet or even afraid to speak up for their loved one, with sickle cell disease when they're in need? What advice would you give that person?
Know your partner, know your significant other, know them, because you have to understand who they are and what they are and how they deal with sickle cell. I give you an example. Get a little technical here. Some folks, doctors will look at if your hemoglobin is a 10 and you say that you're in a sickle cell crisis. Some doctors that are textbook doctors and want to manage every sickle cell patient as the same, someone that has a 10 hemoglobin or 11 can still be in a sickle cell crisis and be in a very painful one. Hanifa averaged at 8.2. I don't know what you may average at this particular time, but you have to know the person's body, because if you don't know the person's body, for instance, Hanifa would be in a crisis. If she was in a crisis for a little over a week and a half, and her hemoglobin, is a little short. Let's just say her base is 8.2, and it's supposed to be, it falls to about 7.8, and she's stuck there. She needs a transfusion. Because she's stuck. And that's how did I find that out? Because observation. Observation, then working with doctors. You got to have a team of doctors. And see, this is the problem. One of the problems is that a lot of you sickle cell patients go into the hospital and don't have a private, when I say private or personal, a caretaker. You go into the hospital and you get followed by this team, this internal medicine. Back in the day, Hanifa graduated from the hematology, the pediatric hematology, to the adult hematology. Hematology departments deal with sickle cell blood diseases. And now they have to be consulted. So the care has become somewhat inferior, because a lot of these doctors are practicing doctors, and I understand that you have to practice, but to you, and you've been through it, that you got a practicing doctor and is trying to go down this checklist, but as your loved one is saying, no, this needs to be done, but then they don't take that in consideration and think because they got MD behind their name and you don't know what you're talking about. And that's a sad reality. So know your person, and know what you're speaking about, and understand that it's going to come a time that you're going to have to speak up for a person, and be strategic in it, be strategic in it.
Wow. Yes, I agree. Again, great advice, and we're bringing these issues up because some people have no clue, like you said. Like, well, time is winding down. I have a couple more questions for you, and to follow up on that, what would you say was one of the hardest things for you while you see your wife in the hospital, she's ill, and how would you work to ensure that she's getting that proper medical care?
There's a couple of hard things, it's when you go in and you're not getting what is considered the proper care. You get nurses that seem that they don't have compassion, because as you mentioned about caregiver, we entrust our loved ones in the hands of the health professionals out there. And we expect them to be professional, but they have lives too. And that's why I said, don't take a job like that as a job. That's not a job to get into because you need a job and a paycheck. You get into it because you honestly love helping people. But the hardest things is when you have to rely on the doctors to do the right thing and pray that the body responds. Yeah, that's number one. Number two, when you have a family, I have to juggle. I got to make sure and advocate for her. But when you have children, and we were blessed to have children, the hardest thing is to reassure them on their everyday, day to day, and then reassure them mommy's getting better, making sure that there is communication between them, in-person communication, unless you can't get there. You understand? Because there's a connection, there's a bond, and you got to realize. Hanifa told me a long time ago. She said, "Fatiyn, I hate to tell you this, but I live my life for my kids." And I said, I understand that. So we gotta, that's hard when your children look at you and say, is mommy gonna be all right? Or is mommy going to die? When they're in elementary school. Wow. And, and those are some of the hardest things, because we just look at from the perspective of just the health. Yeah, the health care. We look at it from that perspective. And then to see her suffer in pain just to make sure that we are right, where she'll push herself at home to the point of no return. And then when she goes in the hospital, she's in stitches. And I appreciate that, but then she's broken her body down and it's harder to recover. So it's just really hard to see a loved one suffer. Yes. But once you know what you're doing and what your role is, then you fall into that position and you do it the best way you can. And then hopefully you can have some kind of support group too, because it's not easy doing it by yourself.
Yes, and I always say, like, life doesn't stop when you go into the hospital. It's still going on. Things are happening, but you're still in a hospital, and, you have to come out and meet all of these things that you've been missing, and you need someone to kind of help you navigate that. Okay, but lastly, I just want to know, looking ahead now, what changes or improvements that you think would help the sickle cell community, for caregiver advocates, and even for warriors that advocate for themselves?
I'll just tell you straight up that, and this is something that I'm not as close and involved like I used to be. So for me, I have to be very careful not to criticize, because I don't know the advocacy. I know that the Sickle Cell Thalassemia Patient Network in New York is still functioning. We used to also work with Miss Gloria Rochester with QScan, but I think that might be on hiatus now. I'm not sure. But what I say, and one of the weaknesses that I see with sickle cell is two things. It's considered Black disease. That's number one. So when it's considered a Black disease, you get inferior treatment because we are in a systemic racist society. We're not going to debate that. It's gotten worse with healthcare.
Yes.
Number two, when you used to advocate for yourself, or we advocated for ourselves, we could push the envelope across that line. Now, when people advocate for themselves and the hospital or the administration don't like it, they just throw you out the hospital.
Yes, yes.
So,
Which is
so the
incredible
worst,
just to think about.
and the reason why they get away with this, and I'll look this straight in the eyes to all those sickle cell patients, is that you think about this and you talk about it when you're in crisis and when you're in the hospital, but when you come home, some of y'all forget about it. Mm-hmm. And one of the things, I was talking to a young lady who's Black. Mm-hmm. Her name is Nicole Kelly, and she has cystic fibrosis, which more white folks are affected by that. They have more people that donates money, and they have people that are, as a coalition, they are movement. So when people from the cystic fibrosis are dealing with, they can call an organization and they can get people, and they can get politicians, and they can get other people because they are a movement. And with sickle cell, it's splintered. And that's the problem. You got so many different groups, and there's nothing wrong with your independency, but there needs to be a coalition of all these groups that move as one. Because when you move as one, yes, you become more powerful. And when you become more powerful, then you make them have to answer. You demand and command them to answer, because they have to do their job and can't get away by not doing their job and being slack on the job, because it can cost a person's life.
Well said, well said. Okay, well, we come to the end of this discussion, and again, thank you so much. You're helping so many people by just giving your pointers and just, expounding on your experience and letting people know that, as the program is named, your voice is powerful. So we're at the end of our premiere interview on The Advocate, The Power of Your Voice. Thank you again to our wonderful guest, Fatiyn Muhammad.
Thank you, Stacey. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for doing what you do as a sickle cell warrior by keeping people informed and keeping people abreast. Thank you for writing a children's book, Mama Pooh, that deals with a child that has sickle cell, which is you. Mm-hmm. You understand? And as you have two boys, two sons, yes, that they go through the same challenges that my children went through, and you're still blessed to be here. So continue to fight, and I'm always there for you.
Thank you for joining us for The Advocate, The Power of Your Voice. Each episode, we're going to bring to you a segment called The Sickle Exceller. This is where we pay homage to those who are doing great things in the sickle cell community. For our very first episode, the sickle celler this time is Shabrion Howard, widely known as Shay the Advocate, a passionate mental health and sickle cell patient. After surviving trauma, PTSD, and mistreatment within the medical system, Shay chose not to stay silent. Instead, she transformed her pain into purpose by doing the research, healing from within, and holding systems accountable for their actions. This new video series, Hospital Horror Stories, sheds light on what it truly means to rise above hardship while demanding change. From filing complaints with insurance companies, state boards, and medical review boards, to leaving detailed health grades in Google reviews. Shay shares the tools she used to make her voice heard and to prevent the same thing from happening to others. With honesty, resilience, and a clear roadmap for advocacy, Shay the Advocate empowers patients everywhere to protect their health, reclaim their power, and turn their own trauma into triumph with her new online video series, Hospital Horror Stories. Let's give Shabrion Howard a round of applause for the exceller for this episode. Thank you, Shay.